So should we start? Go ahead. Okay, great. Okay, well, hello everyone. It's about 7 a.m. here where I am in New York. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. I think could be a good session. I will be the first presenter. My presentation will be about a very controversial topic, but I think a very timely one, which is about the relationship between welfare state governance and human enhancement technologies. And I think there's an issue of justice there that needs to be tackled, and it's barely been touched in the literature at the moment. I think, the fact that I'm doing this 7 a.m, I think it's sort of appropriate because when we're talking about human enhancement, we're talking about going beyond our normal limits, and definitely speaking at 7 a.m is already going beyond my normal limits. It's stretching me to the point of my biological capacities. Okay, so what we're dealing with here is a set of technologies. So let's see if I can change the slide here. What we're dealing with here is that sort of broad set of technologies and innovations that are associated with going beyond the normal capacities of the human body and mind. So this could be a broad category, and some people include even things like glasses as ways of enhancing sight that have been around for really centuries now, to more modern and even non-existent technologies such as pills that will make you live longer or be smarter or happier, and so it's sort of this category of technologies, of which also physical enhancements, prosthetics, and also mental various ways of cognitive enhancement are examples. There's no clear definition of what is included and excluded from the definition. It's an appropriately broad category, but I think it's an important set because as we are already in the technological age, the importance of these technologies and these innovations will be more and more important. And even if there's a lot there that is uncertain, that is, we don't know the social impact, the individual impact of, for example, these various new pharmaceutical or technological sort of interventions. We do think that there's something there that carries great potential costs, but also great potential benefits. And it's very important also thinking about who should get access to them and under what conditions. So I'm sort of tackling this from a point of view of several strands of current debate. So on the one hand, there's this whole emerging debate about effective altruism and associated with that long-termism, sort of arises out of this sort of utilitarian concern for thinking about, well, if you want to help the poor, want to advance social welfare more broadly, we should do it effectively. We should think about ways that are, carry long-term consequences, and that we should be investing more resources into those kinds of interventions and policies. And more broadly, even this is the second sort of strand. There's the whole evolutionary economic literature that I've been tackling now in my PhD that I finished last winter on basic income and evolutionary economics. So there's the whole idea of kind of like Schumpeterian creative destruction, the idea that we're going to be sort of seeing these massive transformations. And as part of these massive transformations, human enhancement technologies are undoubtedly an important part. And the third part is this more narrow debate about the ethics of human enhancement. Notable names include Julian Savulescu, Alan Buchanan, and Steve Fuller, and others, where this debate has been raging. And I'm trying to sort of bridge these different levels of analysis and to bring them fourthly to the basic income debate, because basic income debate obviously cares about about the poor, cares about perhaps the setting up new set of rights and rules for society for everybody, and also cares about often about the idea of real freedom. For example, in Van Parijs's case, the idea of people should be able to do what they want to do. Well, the question then is, does this include perhaps the right to engage in certain kinds of human enhancement? And if, for example, basic income recipients receive their money, should they be allowed to, and will they be tempted to spend their money on some of these new emerging and untested technologies? And I'm also sort of taking inspiration from this emerging literature on developmental economics, and this literature that suggests that not only in the developing world, in poor countries, but also in the rich countries, really, there's the idea that the capacity building, the idea of building up the capacities of the poor, has been neglected, and it's something we should focus on. So obviously human enhancement, the idea of enhancing the human body and mind, can be seen as a form of capacity building, and it also can be seen potentially as a way of sort of bringing out, as for example here in William Easterly's idea of the tyranny of experts being sort of a bane on this welfare state governance, especially in poor countries, but also increasingly, I would say, in rich countries. The idea that poor people are simply sort of the passive recipients or the passive sort of targets of intervention rather than active agents. So I think it's about restoring the rights of the poor and building up capacities. And in this context, we should think about the potential, but also the dangers of human enhancement. So I think a couple of assumptions that I think we should make, and we have reasons to make, that I will at least make, and I invite you to make them too, is first of all that we have some ethical reasons to care about and prioritize the welfare of the poor. It's a very minimal assumption, right? So, whatever our normative broader framework, as long as we have some reasons to care about and prioritize the welfare of the poor, we should really care about all the options available to them, all the ways that their welfare could be enhanced. The second assumption is that we should assume some at least moderate, long-term thinking, some moderate long-termism. We don't have to only care about the very long term. Maybe we have reasons to care about the short term in particular, but if we do care about the long term, and I think we should, this justifies some investments into technological and other forms of biomedical and so on innovations, which carry uncertain and untested for sure, but also promising rewards and risks, and both of which have to be taken into account if we really care about the welfare of society. And the third assumption is that it seems that human enhancement technologies have some reasonable promise of increasing welfare. And if this is so, we should take them seriously indeed. So, I lost myself there for a second, but I think I'm back. I hope you're there too. So the crucial question in this debate is what is called the justice in diffusion of human enhancement technologies. This is clearly brought out by Alan Buchanan, not James Buchanan, but Alan Buchanan's work here that I'm quoting, that one of the most important issues in this debate is determining who gets access to what, when, and at what cost. Because, to quote, in a world in which innovation is a central fact of life, the diffusion of beneficial technologies should occupy center stage in our thinking about distributive justice. Because an uneven distribution of these fruits could lead to massive social inequalities and power inequalities of various sorts that could be very harmful, if only the rich have access to them. Because we should not smugly assume that the benefits of biomedical enhancements will trickle down to the worst of, even if they tend to become available. We've seen lots of innovations tend to go down in price as technology improves and as economic relations become more efficient. we tend to see that the poor people, lower classes, proletarians and so on, to use the old terminology, tend to have access to new technologies, but it comes at a delay, and often the rich are the ones who get the most benefit early on, and this could be seen as an unfair, although it's unavoidable to some extent, because by definition the rich will have more resources available to them. But this is something that we can partially politically also affect. So I think that my two claims here that I'm making are that I think the freedom to experiment with human enhancement technologies, together with basic income, should, if we make these assumptions that I've made, should be guaranteed to all citizens, and especially perhaps the poor, of course, subject to various regulations and risk management that come with that. The freedom to experiment with them, that is the right to engage, if people so choose, with these more controversial new types of welfare enhancing tools that could be useful for them, both in the short term and in the long term. And this should be supported perhaps by giving people money that they can use as they please, not targeted to using particular products or services, but full freedom to use it as they please. And so the second claim that I'm making is that, as some people have claimed, there's a moral duty to enhance, that it's not enough simply to say people have the right to do so, but they should have the duty. But I think this is going too far. I won't get into the argument of why I think it goes too far, but I think it is sufficient. It is enough to give people the sort of the right, in the sense of the formal right, but also the substantial right, or what Van Parijs called the real freedom, perhaps, to use these technologies with the support of basic income, and also the formal rights structure that supports their ability to do so. Note that what I'm not saying is that, on the one hand, for example, poor people have some natural right to do these things because of their autonomy or dignity. Perhaps not. My argument is purely consequentialist, in the sense that I'm only looking at welfare consequences, and in particular the sort of promising long-term consequences of these technologies, for which reason I think alone we should have reason. Of course, if we also think people have autonomy and dignity, this could support the idea that they should also have the right to use these, even if they would carry harmful consequences. But this is a separate strand of argument. Secondly, I'm not saying that these technologies are a guaranteed way to help people. I don't think there's anything guaranteed about them. I'm not a techno-optimist in the full sense of this term. I think even if we disbelieve in techno-optimism, sort of the Silicon Valley discourse about these things, I think even if their benefits are widely overblown and perhaps their costs are underestimated even, there's probably still, as long as they carry some potential expected reward, that's enough reason to say they should be part of the conversation. They should be part of the debate, and poor people and everybody should have some access to them because of these promising rewards. Lastly, I'm not saying that there should be no regulation of these things, obviously not. So I'm not advocating for a complete laissez-faire attitude towards that. But I think we should be focusing more on sort of like of erring on the side of permission to engage with them, rather than the default being that poor people don't have access to them. And so, therefore, to a very, very sort of curtailed form of my presentation, to already reach the conclusion here, I think it's very important to think about these technologies, because they are very, very controversial, of course, as we know, and there's much about them we don't know. But there's so much about the world that we don't know. So I think it's exciting to think about that which we do not know, expanding the horizon of our understanding. And in particular, in the context of welfare state governance, we need to come up with ways of including the unknown into our governance framework. So the first sort of conclusion that I wish to draw from this, that if we assume overall positive sort of rewards to sort of disruptive welfare enhancing innovation, especially in the realm of human enhancement technologies, we should prioritize ability to have access to these innovations, perhaps especially for the poor, because the poor are the ones who have the most to gain from promising new technologies, for example. The second conclusion is that if we have a regime that prioritizes kind of innovation and exploration, we cannot exclude any particular category of technologies. We cannot exclude smart drugs, prosthetics, cognitive enhancements, and so on. All of these things should be part of the conversation, and they should be available to everybody, including the poor. Thirdly, for this reason, I think that all agents, including and especially the poor, should be endowed with both the right, the formal right, but also the substantial means, the sort of real freedom to engage in permissionless innovation, as some people have called, Michael Munger here, I'm quoting, idea of permissionless innovation in these technologies as the default position, checked by various regulations of their long-term potential harm. And so my final slide here, I think that human enhancement technologies have sufficient promise that denying poor people the right to experiment with them constitutes injustice. Secondly, I think a formal right is not enough. Denying poor people unconditional access to sufficient resources to experiment with human enhancement technologies or to abstain from so doing would also constitute injustice. People should have the resources to really make up the substantially non-coerced decision whether to engage with such innovations, such technologies or not. So they need both the right and the resources, that is, the right and the money. And I think money would be better than simply giving them the in-kind version for many reasons. The reasons are very similar to why we want to give people money than in-kind resources as the basic form. Of course, you can also, in addition, give people in-kind access, for example, through a healthcare system where you can implement certain experimental technologies as, for example, part of a public healthcare system. But even if such is done, I think there should still be the right of people to have their own choice in their own realm, in addition to those in-kind transfers, to utilize their own resources to engage if they so choose. And lastly, I think the regulation aspect is very important because there are many costs associated with them, but we should prioritize sort of this new realm of research, which is very important, I think, which is about catastrophic and existential risk management. So we should think more about the long-term horrific, catastrophic outcomes, potential outcomes of these technologies, rather than sort of the ordinary level of, will I be slightly better off, slightly worse off? Will society be slightly better off, slightly worse off? In those issues, I think we should err on the side of permission, or on the side of permissionless innovation. And with that, I will conclude. And I thank you for your attention, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks. So I guess we do have any questions, because we don't have a moderator right now, I guess, but I don't know how we should proceed, but I'm open to questions if anybody has any.
There are some questions on the chat, Otto.
Okay, thanks. Great. Okay, so there's at least two questions there in the chat. Oh, by the way, so I'll try to keep track of time. So I don't have that much time, so I'll just a couple of minutes for questions. So the first question from the chat, let me see. Okay, so there's a question from Damon Hoppe, who says, conversely, is not the problem that only the rich will be able to remain unmodified, whilst the poor, in order to compete in the labor market, will be forced to modify themselves just in order to survive? Surely the idea of UBI should mean that no one would need to be modified in order to survive. And indeed, this is the important question. The two rights that I have emphasized are indeed designed to make this possible. First right being the formal right to engage in innovation, and the substantial second right being the substantial means to do so. But of course, both are bivalent rights in the sense that they both contain the option, the exit option, the option of saying no, and that part is crucial to this strategy. That is, it's very important to think about the resources given to people and the rights given to people as being a real choice where they can completely abstain from, and they are not coerced by institutional structures or labor markets to make one choice over the other. Of course, there will always be social incentives, and those cannot be eliminated, and maybe even things like everybody else is doing it, so why shouldn't I? I have a smartphone, and I can't say the reason I have a smartphone is because I have made it's a personal choice. Of course it's a personal choice, but it's also because everybody else has, and it's just part of our culture. So I think those kind of issues will be impossible to fully eliminate, but the idea that yes, labor market coercion could be minimized through the exit option that basic income provides. So in that sense, it's very important to think that since we don't know whether these things will be good for us or not, we want to enable everybody to make the choice for themselves whether to engage in any way with them or not. Okay, great. And the second question in the chat, I think this will be the last one. So from Catarina Neves, I am wondering how would you go about doing this? Is welfare state policies sort of free activation policy to be added to a basic income in order to encourage the consumption of tech enhancement by the poor? Is it about encouragement or something else? How would this be implemented? Thank you. Right. So I think that my attitude is one of liberal neutrality in this issue, and it goes back to my answer to the previous question. I think the only thing that we need to do is give people the right to do so if they want, and also the resources to really make that choice for themselves without coercion or without having to spend all their money on everything else. So in that sense, I don't think that there needs to be encouragement by the state. I mean, there could be like education to talk both about the costs and benefits. And at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, there could be ways in which, for example, the public healthcare system could partially do its part in implementing these or warning about the dangers of these things. And of course, the regulation state would also have to worry about especially the catastrophic risks associated with them. But I think in terms of encouragement, you could have some nudges, I suppose. But I'm not a particularly big fan of nudging. But it could be an option on the table. But I emphasize the idea of the right to do so if they want, or the right not to do so. So that's one of neutrality. And with that, I will end. And thank you so much for your questions. I guess we'll move on to the next one. Who's the next speaker then?
I'll go. Let's see. Thank you very much for the fantastic talk, by the way. This was really, really interesting topic. All right. Hello, my name is Eylul Dogruel. I'm an artist who accidentally end up in this conference is the best way I can describe this. I do a variety of art, including code art, creative coding, photography, and more traditional medium. And what I'm working with is the stylistic transitions between the mediums. Somewhere in the way, I accidentally got involved with open source software. So I started using open source software myself, and then started volunteering for Ubuntu Studio. From there, it went into advocacy of open source in art, and then teaching photography using open source software, then being more active in Ubuntu Studio, and somehow all of these things also started to tie into the universal basic income. I'm still new at this area. My topic is free culture and open source. So I'm hoping that this talk is going to give a bit of an anecdotal experience of where concretely universal basic income could really make a change. So what does the workflow of an artist look like? We can talk about the, first of all, there is the research on the topics, on the themes that you are working on, the sort of like the theoretic side of your work. And then there is the experimentation of the mediums and ideas. So this is actually what you see on the slide. Like looks like an artwork. It is not. This is me trying a combination of colors and medium and then recording it so that I can later use it on a full work. And then obviously there's a production of the art and then the documentation of it afterwards. This might change slightly from artist to artist. There might be things added, things removed, but like generally this is the idea of how you would go about creating an artwork. So what are the business models an artist will be using to gain their income and live? And that is selling original work, or more recently, NFTs, selling prints of your work or merchandise of your work, so derivative works of the original. It can be government or private funds. Commissions fall somewhere between the selling original works and this area, because you are doing a work specifically for a company, an individual, a location, etc. Crowdsourcing is a new and very active one. Patreon, Kickstarter, Liberapay, etc. And being on social media and becoming an influencer is in certain areas like illustration a very workable option. They're almost, you have your videos and almost your art is something that is addition to what you are doing. So the process gets combined with the actual work. Then, of course, you can be teaching either in the academia or in K-12, so in like high schools, middle schools, etc. Or just teaching adults outside of the more formal setting. That also happens. Some of the social media versions also falls into this, like education of art in digital format. And then there are people who do choose to have an unrelated career and still continue art and do relevant art. So an argument to stop with before we proceed further. There is a problem that we call copyright. Copyright is a compromise copyright and patents are a compromise to try to make sure that knowledge remains public domain, that becomes part of the commons. But at the same time, people who create that work, that comes up with that knowledge, can still sustain themselves. It is a compromise, and at least it is meant to be one. So for some years, they have exclusive right to the information, but then that information goes back to the public domain, to the commons. This increasingly has not been working in this way. But to begin with, by definition, copyright is an error that we need to root around in our common culture. This actually work was shown in ICEA in 2015, and the color that is missing in this blue scale is Yves Klein's International Klein Blue, the exact tone. He didn't exactly patent it, but he used what we call an envelope solo. It's a form of prior art that he has used to document that it was his work. And we see both in terms of trademarks, sometimes special uses of pigments. We see the copywriting and patenting both with pigments and with sometimes even trademarking of the colors, which can become problematic when used outside of the context. There is a solution that we call Creative Commons. It is a partial solution because it doesn't really solve the problem that ideas and thoughts and information is supposed to be commons. What Creative Commons does is that it allows the artist or the musician or the writer, whoever came up with the creative content, to be able to release some rights, whether that is free remixing of the work, whether that's commercial use, non-commercial use, etc. So let's think that you are an artist that is using Creative Commons, that you are releasing your work as a Creative Commons. What does that business model look like? Because you still need to eat. So, well, NFTs are out. NFTs are basically ownership. Yes, in theory, they're supposed to decouple the ownership from the work itself, but in practice, what we are already seeing is them being used to monopolize the use of a certain work. And there are some criticism that it is, turning art into an investment item, and honestly, that is a problem that existed in segments of commercial art for a while now. So that part is not exactly new, and that can be discussed at some point, but like a bit outside of scope. Selling originals, in theory, this is possible if you are creating physical artworks, but in practice, when you are giving an artwork away, usually you are giving some rights of the copyright away. It gets complicated. So trying to work with a gallery selling Creative Commons, not the easiest task, especially if you are working with a digital medium like photography or electronic art, or even something that is more contemporary like performance art and such. So unless you have actual physical object as a result, selling original, if you are also using Creative Commons, becomes complicated. Prints, the problem is that you can sell the prints, other people can sell the same prints if you are, again, releasing your work as a Creative Commons. We have a solution to that. It's not an exact solution, which I'm going to get into in a moment. Merchandise still works, or the rest of them still works. What replaces the idea of selling prints is this idea of selling the better quality version of the work and then giving away the lower quality of it for free. So in photography, you might see photographers uploading their work to Flickr in a certain resolution, but they are still selling the higher resolution of it. It restricts what you can do. So licensing photography, for example, becomes difficult, but still there is some use cases for that. In music, for example, Scott Buckley, and a musician who does work with, who creates CC by just attribution-based music that he releases online, has his music available with this free license in MP3 form, but the better quality, higher quality FLAC forms are only available to his Patreons. So you can see this sort of like separation. Then again, as I said, the rest of these are possible. So let's look at these a bit more closely as to where they work, where they do not exactly work. Merchandise or better quality exclusives works for things that you can still sell as an object, whether they are derivatives, usually. doesn't work for things like contemporary art, electronic art, etc. It is good if you are making the type of work that will have a wide audience, that will have a wide range of appeal. If you are doing something that is very academic, very abstract, very theoretic, this will likely not work very well. The biggest problem here is that, is it still free culture if you are restricting a version of the work that is better quality? Arguably, you are restricting the original and only giving away the derivatives. That's the biggest problem here. Crowdsourcing and social media, here documentation becomes almost a product. So you might have a YouTube, you might have TikTok, you might have a decentralized social media account. And the idea is that you have the demand for your work comes from the fact that people watch you create it and want to support you and want to keep seeing that process of creation. Here, depending on what you are using, crowdsourcing, monthly crowdsourcing, and social media, depending on what you are using there, you have different problems. So if you have a social media or like something like Patreon, you need to be making work that will show up in relatively regular chunks. So either it should be possible to show it regularly, show regular progress of it that is visual and understandable by the public, or you need to be creating smaller scale work, and you are kind of stuck with it. Especially crowdfunding, like something like Kickstarter, is very good with a work that has a wide and existing audience. So social media is where you usually bring the work in, and then existing audience, they will be willing to support your work or be interested in ephemera that might not otherwise have value. Especially Kickstarters needs, because it's a large sum of money, it requires an understanding that it's going to actually be successful, and that's kind of the expectation. So what often happens is that at least the research is done before you can even start this funding. Often what more and more happens is that crowdfunding turns into a way to gain visibility rather than necessarily just getting the funds. Especially with social media, we end up with this problem of reliance on advertising businesses and what the algorithm wants, what the advertising businesses want. And this can be affecting everything from what you create as topic, as subject, to even the tools you use, highlighting, in video, product placements, etc. Like for a traditional artist, for example, it might affect which paint they use because they might be sponsored by a company. Project funds, so government, private, etc., these are fantastic when they happen. However, they often require specific contemporary topics, which is a mixed blessing. On one hand, these do follow important topics, and when I say topics, I don't mean just social issues, but also technology trends. The problem is that they really do follow the trend. So for a while, everything was about blockchain. Then it was about AI. Then it was about VR. Then it was back about AR for the electronic arts, for example. And if you weren't doing these things, it was very unclear if you could even get the funding. So you run into this issue that if you are ahead of the if you came up with something that is truly new, it might take a while before you can find funding for it, because it will take a while for it to be visible and seen as interesting enough to fund. Similarly, other issues that if you are working with something that is more niche, it can become difficult to find these funds. It's not sustainable long term. You cannot keep getting these things. And the other problem is that it's not available worldwide. Usually there is country restrictions to if you can apply to some funds or not. Teaching can be rewarding. This is what I do. But this is where we get to the problem of, it is an overlapping skill, but it's still a different skill set. You might have an artist who's fantastic, who does amazing work, who might not be the best educator. And similarly, you might have an artist whose work is more modest, but they might be a fantastic educator. So this is where we are actually getting into an crossover of skill sets. And this is kind of where we start seeing these problems, general issues that we see across all of these business models. You need additional skills, you need additional accreditations, you need you need skills on understanding of advertisement and audiences. You need to have skills of fundraising. So as an artist, you also become an entrepreneur if you go that route. Additional time spent to earn money. And again, the problem here is that all of these things start taking away from the art creation process and sometimes limits it and changes the way from somewhere that it should not be going into. Artificial limitations of the work and commodification of the ideas. Whenever you start having a work that is funded or a work that you are selling, you are trying to figure out that restriction of what I'm giving away for free and what is going to be the value. Where is that balance to do this ethically? And research and experimentation is not factored in. If you're an established artist with an audience, you probably build this into your time. But if you are just starting out and you need to build this up, there is nothing that you can do yet. You need to build that up before you can actually get into that cycle of building the first project and using the income from that to continue and be sustainable. And this is not something that is factored in. And this does mean that even if you're established, your time that you can allocate to trying new things, coming up with new ideas is very, very, very limited. You might notice that I added something here that says tools requested by funders. Why am I using free and lib and open source software? How does an artist end up here? I had these 3 works that I'm showing. This is literally the only image I have from this work. This was made in Macromedia Director. Then it got bought by Adobe. Then it got the software stopped existing, so I cannot access the code. This is made in Flash. Same story. This was made in Flash, but this was not interactive. I was able to sort of record the screen and get a version of the artwork documented at least. And that's kind of where I end up getting involved in open source software. FLOSS is free lib open source software. That's what it's short for. You will also hear the words FOSS, FOSS, depending on where you are. Because I wanted a software that somebody can pick up and maintain. I wanted a software that will remain. I wanted open document formats. And that's kind of what brought me into this open source software discussion. How does these projects maintain themselves? Again, crowdsourcing, Blender, Crit are 2 very successful examples of that. Open source core plus closed source pro version. OpenVPN does this. Red Hat kind of does this with their enterprise version. You see this a lot in smaller software as well. Commercial support, this is what Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, does. So the software is free, but the support is given. Another example of this is the music software Ardour, where the source code is available, but to compile it, you can buy the compiled version for money. Yes, you can compile it, but it is like you can make the code, make the ready software from the code, but it takes some knowledge, and that's kind of like that difficulty level is where they make sure that the project is funded. And then you have the single person projects. And that's kind of where the problem happens, because often larger projects, it's easy to fund something that is larger and visible if fully completed software. But if it is something like a library, that becomes harder for the end user to see, to know, to support. Even for a company that is using that code, if they don't have funding themselves, they might not be able to support it or just not think about it. Also added to the fact that a lot of these projects can be hobby projects or code that is written by a developer on their spare time. The support is limited. Some of them might just not want to go full time with it because they don't want to deal with the business side of the whole thing. Some people might have issues where they want to do this full time, but just there isn't enough of a visibility for it to be supported. And then also, obviously, in the best case scenario, you end up with the bus problem, where what happens if one critical person in the project ends up getting hit by a bus? And the bus problem even affects some of the projects that are actually crowdsourced and in that non-profit format. A lot of these programs work with very skeletal paid developers. So what is usually spent money on is actual coding, testing, documentation, education, advertisement, visibility. All of these things usually end up with volunteers, which is why these software usually are seen as less good, even when they are better, equally good. That is why they are not as well widely used, which is bad because owning the tools and having able to access the tools and modify the tools is a very integral part of being an artist. What would universal basic income mean to the creativity? It would reduce the time spent seeking money or earning money or learning how to earn money and actually let us do our jobs. It would allow us to actually contribute what we create back to commons much more simply, because we wouldn't have to deal with, do I need to maintain this part so that I can actually still eat at the end of the day, or have enough funds to get myself a new computer to be able to do what I'm doing. Because we can just give, we have the option of giving our work to the commons, we can start pushing this idea that there is no need to commodify the ideas, because the truth is, the whole one person coming up with an idea in an ivory tower is a myth. Ideas get created by dialogue, more so today, where there is so much interaction and communication happening. Ideas are often much contributed an effect of little bits coming from a lot of people than one single person coming up with the whole thing. So this idea of ownership of a work or an idea or an invention, there is a really big thing to debate there, even if it is true or not. It would allow niche ideas and issues to be explored or explored faster, because it wouldn't need to be, again, waiting for visibility and a wide enough audience or rich enough audience for it to be affected. It will equalize the competition for tools, both by supporting the developers who can bring those tools to the commons, which will increase the development of them, and also sort of equalize the competition between tools created by companies that has a lot of resources to allocate to advertisement versus those that are created in grassroots that might sometimes be better or has a potential to become better. And it can help breaking some of those monopolies. And if you think that this seems very on the air, like, shouldn't there be competition? Look at the example of 3D printing. Early 3D printing development happened in a very interesting place where many of the agents involved in it, they willingly had their inventions as open hardware, communicated with allowed the copying of their improvements by each other. They did this by voluntarily giving royalty where needed and sharing all of the information, only using the fancy patents if at all. And what it resulted in, which slowed down now a little bit, was a very rapid development of a technology, surprising in its speed. And that kind of slowed down because we end up with companies who are interested in just building an end user product and not really thinking about contributing back, unfortunately. And they were financially advantageous because they weren't putting resources in innovation. So now we are running into that problem. But at the same time, inventors being able to work without having to worry about income and profit would really solve this problem. And we can see this type of rapid development and rapid generation of ideas, whether that's in the creative fields or in engineering, much more easier. Will this happen everywhere? Probably not, but it will happen in more places than we think. Thank you. I don't know if there's any questions. There's one question. Oh, okay. I intentionally closed the video, so that's why it was. I did speak quite a long time, so I'm going to actually just let the last next person to continue.
I think there was Tadashi Okanouchi, but I'm not sure whether he's here on the chat. If he is the first one, and I can wait. Otherwise, I can move forward.
He's back. He's here yet. I'm not seeing
Yes? I don't.
chat.
Yeah. Okay. I think in that case, if you all agree, I'll start, and maybe he'll join us a little bit later. Is that okay? Okay. So thank you everyone for having me here today, also to the people presenting and for their presentations. My name is Catarina Neves. I'm a PhD candidate at the Center for Ethics, Politics and Society from University of Minho in Portugal. So I'm in Portugal now, a little bit of a different time, like with Otto. So I appreciate that you are here, those who are, that it's a little bit late in Australia, but it might be different times where you are. So I'm here to present a paper where I try to argue that guaranteed income, which can be construed as a form of or a closely parent to or closely son to basic income, can be construed as a gift. And to discuss this based on evidence from a guaranteed income experiment that is taking place in the US. This is part of my larger PhD project on unconditional basic income and reciprocity. But it was also the result of a visiting position that I had in the Center for Guaranteed Income Research in University of Pennsylvania between January and June 2022. So it's going to be an empirical paper in the sense that I'm going to present you some of the quotes and some of the things participants told me while I was interviewing them in Patterson. And I conducted an overall 23 interviews, more or less around February 2022. Just to give you a little bit of context before going into the paper, context of the experiment and of Patterson. So it's called GEEP, which is Guaranteed Income Patterson Pilot. It is an experiment that falls within the umbrella of the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a movement going on in the United States where mayors from the different cities are getting together and are pushing funds, sometimes mostly private, but sometimes public funds, to implement guaranteed income experiments in their own cities. In this case, the mayor of Patterson wanted to do that, and so he was able to secure funds to have an experiment taking place in between 2021 and 2022. It's now coming to a close. For all, I didn't know Patterson, so I imagine maybe some of you also don't know it. It is a city in the northeast of the United States. It's very close to New York, close like 40 minutes, a car drive to New York. It is a very poor city nowadays. It used to be an industrial hub. It was called the Silk City. That's why you have beautiful industrial buildings throughout the city. But in the later part of the 20th century, like many other cities, it got deindustrialized. So there's a lot of industrial buildings, but not a lot of jobs, which means that a lot of people are facing difficulties to make ends meet. It is also a very diverse city. It's 60% Latino, 40% Black African American, and then it has a huge number of melting pot of different cultures, namely a very stronghold of a Bangladeshi community that lives in a particular part of the city. As I told you, the experiment took place between 2021 and it's now getting close to an end. 110 participants were selected, and most of them, a number, which was the treatment group, received $400 per month for 1 year, which is the no strings attached, which is the guaranteed income. Just for you to have an idea, whereas the $400 were quite important for a number of people, they are still small given that a lot of people in the city face huge expenses, namely rent. For example, average rent is more or less $1,560 per month because of its proximity to New York. So you can have a sense of how much the guaranteed income is important, but it's still, it would be good if it could be more. I'm going to start now by telling you a little bit about reciprocity, and then I'm going to dive into the findings and what people told me and how I think that allow us to construe an hypothesis of GI as a gift. What does that mean? What are the implications for readings of guaranteed income? And finally, hopefully at the end in the conclusion, it will be clear why I think this hypothesis and these conclusions allow us to think differently about the objection of reciprocity to unconditional cash. So the norm of reciprocity. Reciprocity is a fairly quite well discussed concept in terms of a virtue, a social norm, in terms of a mechanism for social cohesion, for legitimacy. So it has a broad range of readings across disciplines. It is fairly consensual that we can see it as a universal norm. This term was coined by a sociologist, was Alvin Goldner. But for example, Bowles and Gintis talked about the homo reciprocans, that now is also a fairly common topic, to say that we can see this norm of reciprocity across societies, even if we see it in different ways. And it is easy for most of us to think about what reciprocity is. It is the idea that when you receive a gift, you are obliged, or you should reciprocate it, you should return it. And that can be, I give a gift to you and you return it to me. That's an instance of reciprocity. But it could also be, I give you something and you give something back to someone else. That can also be construed as reciprocity. For the debate on unconditional cash, on basic income, guaranteed income, I think it's important to look at it in two different ways. So one is how reciprocity has been seen as an important criteria to determine who is deserving, this idea of desert. There is a famous not methodology, but taxonomy, usually called Carney, where like Nielsen, Friedrichsen, and Larson talk about, where what determines who is deserving of what are criteria like control, attitude, need, reciprocity, identity, and those are it. Whereas reciprocity is one of the key ones. So in order for you to be deserving of something, you need to give something back. You cannot simply receive it as a handout and do nothing in return. A second very common reading that follows from the first is discussions on how institutional designs of the welfare state have been very influenced by a reading of the norm of reciprocity. And there are broad readings that can accommodate some unconditional and some universal benefits, like, for example, discussions on universal healthcare or universal educational systems. And then there are stricter readings of the norm of reciprocity, like instances of the workfare, where most benefits should be conditioned on something. And usually they are seen as being conditioned on showing proof that you are working or having worked before, or maybe that you are attending some form of education or training. So broadly conceived, the norm of reciprocity is important for discussions on unconditional cash, because policies that do not reflect the norm of reciprocity are said to promoting non-deservingness, laziness, as we usually discuss it in the debate on basic income, or at least being against the overall spirit of what the welfare state should be. So unconditional cash, guaranteed income, basic income are said basically to breach a norm of economic reciprocity that says that in order that all of us who are able-bodied should contribute to the social surplus if we then want to receive the benefits of that corporation. And of course, basic income, unconditional basic income, guaranteed income are forms of unconditionality. Are unconditional, So you receive the money and you don't need to provide anything in return. So now diving into the findings before then going into the conclusions and explaining why I think this is important for discussions of reciprocity and unconditional cash, I would like to tell you some of the things that a lot of the Patterson participants told me that I think allow us to hypothesize that GI was construed as a gift for them before going into what a gift can be. So the first thing was discussions on how the guaranteed income was so distinct from other social assistance mechanisms that they were involved with, namely SNAP, which are food benefits, meaning that they receive some tickets to buy food or some cards where they can only use the money to buy food, or Section 8, which is basically benefits in terms of housing. People like Lady J, for example, told me that it was so much easier, so much simpler. It was so easy to be chosen for a guaranteed income, but also besides being so easy, they also received it in totality, contrary to what sometimes happens with other benefits, that they may try to be eligible, they might even be eligible, but either don't receive it in totality or don't receive it at all. They also told me that a second way that it was very different from social assistance mechanisms was that guaranteed income was in a way very free, because people could use the money, like Billy is saying, to buy healthier foods, to buy foods that they like, but they could also maybe use the money for emergencies, like paying care for health care for a child that gets sick, or maybe even just save the money so that they can prepare for something that happens in the future. So this is the first way. The second way that was very common across the board was discussing how grateful participants felt for receiving the money or for being chosen to receive the money. And you can see Billy, for example, saying that before receiving the money, he needed the help and he never got them. And now that I got this from nowhere or not even expecting him, I'll say, man, God is good. God is in there. I will say loving. I just want to say thank you to everyone. And this was a common perspective, this idea that I'm really grateful to either those who came up with the idea, either those who picked them to receive the guaranteed income, or even just karma, universe, or God, a sense of being so grateful for receiving or for being chosen to receive a guaranteed income. And then a third way where this was very common was discussions on blessing or feeling blessed. So first was feeling blessed, like Kinney is saying when she says that no matter what, because we were discussing here how the guaranteed income was coming to an end, and she says, I'm so blessed. I'm gonna miss it. It will be difficult, but I'll be okay. I made it before. I made it all these years without it. So I'm just looking as it is. It is a gift. It just happens to last 12 months. But a second way where people were discussing feeling blessed was not only about being chosen and having it, but also how a guaranteed income in itself was a blessing. And look at Lady J, for example. She focuses on how much the guaranteed income in itself was a blessing because she needed the extra money. Because at that point in her life, the extra money was so important for her to make sense of all the expenses and all the things that she needed to buy for herself and for her family. So I believe that these findings allow us to hypothesize GI as a gift, because it's not surprising for all of us to think that when we receive a gift, we obviously feel gratitude to the person who has given us, if the gift is good, of course, but we feel some form of gratitude. We might feel blessed either because they chose us to give us something or because the gift in itself was such a blessing. And it's also, usually gifts are in a sense freeing. You can do whatever you want with that gift. You do not have necessarily to do something else with it or to be conditioned to do something with the gift. It doesn't mean that you don't have obligations. We'll go into that afterwards, but it just feels that being free, it's one more thing to construe GI as a gift. So why is it important to discuss GI as a gift? Usually when we think about gifts, a lot of people might think about charity or might think about handouts, but I want to push back against that perspective and go into a more, not traditional, but what's more of a reading of gifts as in anthropological readings, like Marcel Mauss, Maurice Godelier, or Marshall Salins, but that are also present in philosophy and sociology, which is the idea that gifts entail obligations. When you give something to someone, that person is going to feel obliged to return it, reciprocity, or to returning to someone else or to pass the gift along. And this is very well expressed with Mary. Mary told me in the interview how she felt that herself and others should do right with money. So once you received the guaranteed income, you had an obligation to do right with it, to kind of honor the money that you had received. And I believe this was expressed in three different ways in in the different interviews. So the first very common one was a sense of individual obligation. So for example, Ruth expressed something that is common and that was common across the sample. She was saying, we were asking her how she used the money, and she was cautiously telling us, and you can read that, to be completely honest, she used the first money to buy a bedroom set. And she was saying this because she was feeling that maybe a bedroom set was a form of splurge. Maybe it was something that is not necessarily responsible. But she wanted us to know that she was self-aware that the bedroom set could not be considered responsible, but it was very important for her. It made her very happy, as you see in the quote. And then she used the rest of the money to buy things that she really needed, to buy things that she really felt that was responsible. So it's a sense people telling us how they use the money and how they are using the money in a way that is responsible and in a way that is self-aware that they need to honor the money that they have received. A second way I called collective accountability is expressed by Dante. He says that he's concerned about something that expresses the way he uses and feels about the money and expects other people to do the same, which is, I felt like in the beginning, most people would do what I did and just sort of just buy something, like be done with it. I don't know, something that they couldn't really afford before or something. But then from there, I don't know. I guess some people will do what I did and they try to make use of it. And then he goes on saying that some might just take it for granted. What he's trying to say is that I expect other people to do as me, and that should be what happens, which is if you receive this unconditional money, you use it, you might be a little bit dumb with it in the beginning, but you use it in a way to advance your life prospects and to make your situation better off. For example, he created and used the money to build credit, which is important in the US to be able to be in a better situation in the future. And then the third one I call expressions of reciprocity or reciprocal behavior, but it's very close to the individual obligations. It is expressed by Billy. A lot of people said that because they had more money, they could share it around with their family members. I remember Maria, for example, telling me that she was able to buy a gift to her parents that have helped her a lot in the past months. But Billy, for example, says that he can go out in the street and not only have the capacity to give some money to people who need help, but please take a look at what he says in the end, which I think it's even more important. He's saying that now that I'm getting some help, I can help somebody else, which is in a way saying that because I'm being helped, I'm also impelled to help someone else, not only because I have the capacity, but because I feel somewhat of indebtedness for having been helped also. So I feel, as I was telling you, the slogan is doing right with the money. In a way, gifts come with these sort of obligations, individual, collective, and expressions of reciprocal behavior, with just a final note to say that, of course, this capacity to share the money around was not evenly distributed. Some people in the sample are single moms with 1 or 2 kids. Of course, they had outstanding debts and a huge number of expenses that they needed to pay, which might not allow them to have money at the end of the month. Or other people might simply have too many things to buy, too many things to use the money with, and cannot share it with other people. Despite of that, and knowing that the sample had very low income people included, it's still surprising to see this sense of needing to share it with other people, I think, and also think that it was great to know about this. So now to wrap up in terms of conclusion. So I think that it is important to focus on this doing right with money as sort of post-gift obligations. And those are post-gift obligations, not only general ones, but I think most surprisingly is that they are related with how participants felt their conceptions of deservingness of desert were. So in a way, basically, it means that participants are returning and reciprocating the money they received in a way that they think shows they are deserving of the money that they have. And that's why I'm saying it's a reciprocity, not only in terms of coming back and working a lot or giving a lot of gifts to other people. It's reciprocity in the behavioral function and monetary way. And I also think humbly, but in a humbler way, but I think it's a little bit of a new perspective, or it's a different perspective, because one, it means that we are not equating giving money to a free handout. That's not obviously what I'm saying. But also, contrary to what is usually perceived and to what I said in the beginning, GI, if construed as a gift, which I think we can do, comes with strings attached. It's actually no strings attached money, and namely the obligations of honoring the money by reciprocating in different ways that we as individuals believe makes us deserving of the money that we have received. And to close, just some questions and things that I'm dwelling in that we can discuss in the Q&A if we want. So the first is whether these post-gift obligations translate into a fairer outcomes in terms of social policy, because in a way it's conditioning how people are using the money, but it's different from strict conditionality that exists in work for the dole policies. So what I'm asking is this making GI still a better policy steer, a fairer policy than other social policies? A second is whether this is common across other experiments, but also a third, whether this would happen with a universal or unconditional basic income. And fourth, would this hold if it was a public policy and if it wasn't an experiment? That would also be very interesting to know. That's it. I hope I didn't speak for too long. Thank you so much. And now let me see. So I guess we have a question. Thank you, Otto. So you're saying the reciprocity of the gift economy could create the sense of gratitude and even an obligation to contribute back to society. Yeah, I agree. I think it's neglected. So treating implies a strong class rule or power. Power the one who receives. They have the. And then the question is, could this power imbalance reinforce class distinction that are incompatible with egalitarianism? Thank you, Otto. That is a great point. So a lot of the concerns with the gift literature is that gifts, because they entail obligations, they always entail or can always entail some form of power imbalance. I'm still writing the theoretical part of it. As I told you, this is an empirical paper. I think there is a way of promoting of guaranteeing that gift exchanges can happen in a way where reciprocity is autonomous. So in a way where debts are not instrumentalized either in a dominating way, which is a concern, or are not instrumentalized in a way as fulfilling misrecognition. I think those are the two key points. So if you have a basic income that distributes resources in a fair way, you want to make sure that if we construe it as a gift, and we believe that is a gift with obligations, we do not create a situation where is a possibility for domination or a possibility for misrecognition, which in a way class distinctions can be seen as misrecognition. I think a UBI can do it, but I think a UBI will not be enough, probably. So on the one hand, we will need to see whether this conception of a GI can be included if we consider unconditional basic income and not just an experiment on guaranteed income. So the fact of being universal will ensure that it's a gift, and maybe that is a gift where there's no class distinctions. That would be the first one, I think. And then secondly, we need to understand whether just the distribution of resources is enough to ensure that these class distinctions are a little bit mitigated, or if we need other things. Like, for example, I think it's Jürgen and Birnbaum that are arguing that a UBI in itself in the project of new republicanism will not be enough, because, for example, you need caps on capital. I think that's something of the sort. So just to say that I'm not sure whether it would be enough. I'm still working on the theoretical part of it, but it's a very good point. Yes, now we should have the final presenter, right? If no one else, which is Tadashi Okanouchi. I'm not sure if he's here.
We have the final speaker. Well, I don't see our final speaker. So I guess we have time for a few questions, or if anybody has any more.
Oh, I'm here. I'm reading a question by Liz. Thank you, Liz. I would love to know more about your research. So if you want to share your email here, or otherwise you have mine in the presentation and you want to shoot me an email, that would be great. So you're asking to what extent you think the sense of gratitude or gift is coming from the fact that this GI was not a universal and not permanent. And secondly, you think this sense of obligation could curtail political demand making. Can one claim or demand a gift? Could in fact be the reason there is a general lack of grassroots political movement demanding a UBI? The first, I'm not sure. So because it was an empirical paper, it's difficult to assert, as it happens with research, but I think that's great. But it's difficult to assert what is necessarily an impact of GI solely, or what might be an impact of GI interacting with the experiment in itself, that is, as you are pointing out, not universal, but is also, and I'm going to go against myself, but it's also a randomized controlled trial. So in a sense, it's a lottery. I strongly believe we could still feel it as a gift, even if it was universal. It just depends on the narrative, but also the design of not the guaranteed, either the guaranteed income or the basic income, so that we can attribute or we can discuss who is giving who to whom. Maybe it is a gift from previous generations. Maybe it is a gift that we are all given ourselves because of what we've done um, in terms of development, or what we do in daily life. Depends, I think a lot it will depend on how we framed it, and then on the institutional design that it happens, because institutional designs have performative impacts in how people read them. So I believe it can be, but I'm not sure if it will. It would be theoretically, I would say possibly, depending on how we do it. It would depend on how it is implemented. In terms of your second question, I've never thought about it. Can one claim or demand a gift? Yes, I think you can. I think anthropological literature would tell you yes. We are too much used to thinking about gifts either as handouts, as I was saying, or as direct exchanges, which is kind of what the market economy has done to us in a way, but thinking that gifts are always unilateral. It's between me and you, for example, Liz. I give you, you give me. And in that sense, it's weird to think about a gift that it's not entirely voluntary. But I would say, yes, you can demand a gift. And in anthropology, you can see how gifts, when they are indirect and in networks, there's a sense that people in the network can claim gifts that that in the sense others should give them because they have received something else before. So I would say yes. How that connects to a lack of grassroots political movement in demanding a UBI, I think that's my very I don't know, because I don't know all the movements on UBI, but from my context, which is the one that I can speak the most, which is in Portugal and a little bit in Europe, I think there is a general lack of knowledge on what a basic income is or a conditional basic income is. And without knowledge, it's very difficult to have grassroots political movements. So I think the first problem is that is very different from whether people are construed it as a handout, construed it as a gift, or as an entitlement, or whatever. I think there's a general misconception or even entirely no knowledge about what a UBI is. So we first need to have discussions on what a UBI is, so that then people can be convinced or not for it, and start getting involved in grassroots political movements or creating their own for a UBI. But I would love to hear about your presentation of your research, Liz.
Well, I don't know if we have any more questions. Maybe I'll just ask you a very quick one, sort of related to what I was asking earlier. If you want to take it, so if you have kind of related to what Liz was asking, if you have a gift relation, at least in this sort of bilateral sense, which does exist in these experiments where you have one source that has the money and gives it away, and one group that gets it. It's off. It's if you have a gift, it's something that can be taken away, right? So it seems the gift always involves something like the ability to take away. So is this a problem for basic income if it can be taken away, or it can be not given, at least not all the time?
Yeah, I think I was discussing, thank you, Otto. I think I was discussing with someone why construing as a gift can be more detrimental for social justice instead of doing and construing it as an entitlement, because an entitlement is tougher to, or it's, you have to have much more legitimacy to take it away or cannot do it at all. Sure. So gifts can not be given, right? You can decide that you don't want to give. So in a sense, sure, that can be a limitation versus an idea of an entitlement. What I'm trying to come about. So my project in general, and because I'm so obsessed in a good way with reciprocity, just for you to I hope I can't answer in the end, but my project is to try to bridge the gap between what is the individual nature of a UBI, because it is an individual cash grant, and the concerns about being alienating and not generating cooperative justice, and a strong belief that a UBI can be very good for the community and can generate interdependence in the sense and in a way that other policies and certainly other social assistance mechanisms are failing to do. So while I believe that a GI as a gift can certainly be taken away, what I'm trying to argue for is an idea where GI creates interdependence in a community in a way, as I told you, that is non-dominating, in a way that it's conducive to recognition instead of misrecognition. And I think in doing that, while you certainly in theory can take a gift away, it becomes much tougher because it becomes a network where everyone is gift giving themselves. And so not giving is entering into a non-compliance that is not preemptively required, that is not necessarily punished in the way that we are doing with welfare states, but it certainly might be conducive to social norms that try to avoid that non-compliance takes place. And I think that could reduce the possibility of GI being taken away, while certainly in theory it could, because a justification is different from an entitlement. That would be what I would say. Probably this is very convoluted because, as I told you, I'm still writing on the theoretical part. But yeah, that would be the general idea. My point is really, I'm dwelling into how construing as a gift is different from construing it from an entitlement, and what are the pros and cons of doing it for social justice. And that's certainly a way, that's certainly one where a gift might be not as great for social justice in a way as an entitlement could be. So I need to think about it.
Thanks a lot. I guess we have time for maybe one more question, since we don't have our final speaker, but we have a few minutes left. If anybody has, I guess, to any of the speakers at this point, but yeah, just write something in the chat if you have anything.
I have one for you, Otto, because then I could not add it to what we were discussing, to what you answered to my question. So I felt it was really interesting that you were saying that we need to give the resources, but in a way where people are not, if the least advantaged members of society want to engage and consume technology and human enhancement technologies, they can do so without being destituted. But how could you go about doing that? Because then you would have to, I'm not saying that's bad, but you would have to either increase the basic income to what can be an amount that is not sustainable, or even one that it doesn't make sense, just to accommodate what might possibly be very expensive technologies, or at least technologies that are whose profit is being technology who are very expensive in the service of companies who are trying to exploit them the most. So how would you go about it? Is it controlling prices, or would it be to increase the basic income, or a little bit of both?
Okay, thanks. And thanks for reciprocating my question. Questions can also be gifts. So in this issue, I think it's there always has to be some threshold, and so basic income can be seen as a threshold. So in a way, it can never be a full guarantee to have access to all the available technologies, precisely because there's an upper limit to it, right? And the upper limit sets sort of the boundaries. One of the advantages of giving it in the form of basic income is that people can use that resource bundle in the way that they see fit, and therefore they can prioritize what they want to spend their money on. And I think it should be high enough, again, to have access to sort of the sufficient level of these technologies. But I mean, some of them will be very expensive and only affordable to the rich, at least at the beginning. Although, like I said, you tend to see a curve where you start with very expensive technologies becoming much more affordable over time. This has happened with computers, for example, that started very expensive, that became very affordable. With eyeglasses, for example, they're very affordable now, but they used to be quite expensive. You see, so and with smart drugs too, I think one of the problems with pharmaceuticals is the patent system, which tends to make drugs more expensive than they should be. So I would be in favor of reforming the patent system, for example, as a means of doing that. And as far as very expensive, for example, healthcare technologies, I think some of that could be covered by health insurance or a public healthcare system, which could be a way to sort of like make sure that some of those expensive technologies are granted in the form of only those who really need them will have access to them, but everybody will have access to them if they need them. So I mean, yes, I think it raises many questions, but that's my thinking, that many of them will become affordable, at least somewhat affordable over time, and those that do not, some of them will have to be pioneered by the rich and later become available to the poor, while others can be part of the in-kind part of the welfare state in terms of, for example, the healthcare system. But I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Otto.
Okay, I think we're also out of time, so maybe we should just end the session. So I guess thanks, everybody.
Thank you.